I know everybody in this room and probably most of the media around the world would like to think that's the FBI's sole responsibility, but that's probably one of the smallest things that they've got going on their plate.
Is this a small investigation in relation to all the other work that you're doing?
Sir, we consider it to be a highly significant investigation.
Acting FBI Director McCabe this week contradicting Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders on the investigation into Russian interference and possible links to the Trump campaign. And we're back now with the panel. Well, Julie, part of the story this week, beyond this investigation, was what it said about the Trump White House and the disarray there. You had the communications people like Huckabee Sanders, like Spicer, sent out to defend the president with very little advance notice, apparently about an hour. The cover story that it was all as a result of the recommendation of the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, fell apart within 48 hours. And now there are these continuing stories that the president is considering a major shakeup in the White House. Folks, I got to tell you, there is a story this morning that the president is considering firing Priebus, Bannon, Spicer, everybody in the White House, and basically turning things over to Ivanka, Jared, I'm not kidding here, and their associates. Question, how bad is it over there right now?
They're in a pretty untenable situation right now because you have a president who, frankly, does not trust people on his own staff. He is furious about all of the leaks that have come out since he took office. He is trying to keep information away from people on his staff. The fact that the communications staff didn't find out about this decision until an hour before it was announced, they were set up for failure in that situation by the president. If he can't trust people on his staff to implement his decisions, it's going to have ripple effects across his entire agenda, not just dealing with this Comey situation. I will say, though, the president goes through these phases where he will start asking people, who do you think would be a better chief of staff? Who do you think would be better at the podium? Often he talks himself out of those decisions. So he might be in one of those moods right now where he's ready to clean house. By Monday morning, we could wake up and we could be talking about a completely different landscape.
I want to pick up on your comment about the president's agenda, Josh, because as I discussed with the two senators, the president's agenda seemed to be finally gaining some momentum with House passage of repeal and replace, Senate working on that, talk about tax reform, other issues. How much concern is there in Republican ranks that the continuing furor over this, and more importantly, the disarray inside the White House, the impact it may have on the president's agenda? And is there concern in Republican ranks about him possibly being a drag on the party in the 2018 midterms?
Well, look, I think in terms of his agenda, it's the one piece that almost every Republican from, in the Senate, from Susan Collins to Rand Paul, think we ought to be focused like a laser on. And as long as the president and his administration stays focused on it, all of the Republicans on Capitol Hill seem very content for that. The question is whether or not all of this distraction actually weighs it down. And there's no question in my mind that it does. I mean, every president hands members of its own party in Congress a knapsack. The question is how many rocks you put in it and how much they have to haul around. And there's been an awful lot of rocks in the first 120 days loaded into that knapsack. And so, I think that they're still making progress on health care reform, repeal and replace, and the tax reform proposals. And they obviously confirmed Justice Gorsuch, which for many Republicans is sort of the biggest thing you can accomplish in an administration. So on the agenda, they're still focused like a laser, but there's no question the political distractions are a problem.
Bob, a big part of the story of Watergate, particularly as you reported it, was not political, it was psychological, and what led President Nixon to do things that in the end only ended up hurting himself and that were totally self-inflicted and totally unnecessary. And I guess the question I have is, when you see what's happening now with reports the president was furious about Comey's testimony on TV, that he's watching hearings and going through TiVo on them, do you see any similarities?
We don't know yet. I mean, the great question in Washington, the country, and the world is what's inside of Trump? What's driving him? As we look at the Comey firing, it was Karl Rove's declaration to me many years ago, you always have to look at consequence and outcome. And the consequence and outcome of the Comey firing. Some people are saying, oh, it's part of the obstruction of justice. It actually may be the opposite, the acceleration of justice. Now people are not going to back off on this. So the inside of Trump is one of the mysteries that just doesn't go away.
But how do you explain what seems to be his consuming emotions about the legitimacy of his presidency, and whether it's Comey, whether it's the Russia investigation, that anything that seems to question whether or not he's the legitimate president, instead of being able to kind of brush that off, he is consumed by it?
Well, look at the campaign. There were these emotional outbursts all the time. That's the way he operates. The question here really is, as we look back on this week from a historical perspective, the big issue may not be the Comey firing. It may be the massive cyber attack worldwide that really jeopardizes every communication that anyone engages in. And the second issue, the North Korean missile firing, you see the trajectory on that? Landed 60 miles off the coast of Russia. Can you imagine in this country if a North Korean missile landed 60 miles away from Los Angeles? Those are giant issues. So, you know, doing the psychiatric examination of the president is something we are certainly immensely unqualified to do.
We need Charles Krauthammer here. Karl, but I am fascinated by it. You worked in the Bush White House. How much of a pressure cooker is it inside that Oval Office as things come at you, and how important is it to be steady?
There are so many things that come flying across the transom, and the pressure is enormous. And like any organization, the guy at the top, the gal at the top sets the tone. And the guy at the top in this administration is displaying an absence of confidence. He's not confident in his own victory. He's not confident in the fact that he's president. He's not confident that the Russian investigation is going to turn up into nothing. And it shows. Really problematic in these articles is the sense that the president is saying the system failed me. All of these people are not doing their jobs. He failed them. This is a moment of crisis. He needs to say, you know what, we're all in the foxhole together, and I've made mistakes, and we're going to do better. He needs to set the tone. Otherwise, not only is he going to lose people, he's going to find it hard to recruit good people to replace them. But think about every one of these things. It was his decision to fire. Right decision, in my opinion, but the method of firing was his decision as well. The communications, the absence of a communication strategy was a result of his decisions. His people went out and said things. I'm confident they went in and said, Mr. President, we're going to say that the Rod Rosenstein memo is the reason you did this, and he undercuts them 2 days later. He's the guy who puts out this unnecessary controversy with the tweet about the tapes. Now, this is a huge issue because if I were them, I'd start cleaning this mess up by getting out there now and saying either there are tapes and we'll make them available, or the president was trolling and there are no tapes. Get this controversy behind us and step back for a minute and realize what damage the president has done to his own cause and the cause of his agenda by doing the things that he's done over the last 5 years.
Less than a minute left. I want to pick up on this one thing, because if there was anybody whose election was questioned, it was George W. Bush's. We had the hanging chads, we had all of the recount. What was his attitude about that, when people said, well, you're not the legitimate president, and how did it affect him in those first days in the White House?
Look, he knew he was president. He won the Electoral College. He took the oath of office. He knew he was president. He also knew he had a special burden to unite the country. That people were worried about that there were very strong emotions on both sides, that a lot of people thought he was illegitimate. To this day, Paul Begala will not admit he's a legitimate president of the United States. Dan Rather, whom I saw you make your comment about earlier, I suspect he doesn't think he's legitimate either. But Bush's attitude was, I am the president, and I have to show I'm the president by working across party lines and drawing the country together when we can.
Thank you, panel. See you next time.